Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar today. We are just going to give it probably 1 minute as people are entering the virtual doors here. I see people are signing on, which is really great. If any of you want to share where you're tuning in from, would love to hear that in the chat. I'm coming in from good old Boston in the northeast of the US. It's fall weather here. Where are all you coming from? Very cool. UK, Denver, France, Toronto, Ireland, Panama. Definitely all different weathers across the board here. Stockholm, Argentina, South Africa. Awesome. Welcome. Ohio, Montreal. Love it. Iraq, Portugal. All right. It's great. We got a great group here. So we're going to get started as more sign on. So again, I want to say hello and welcome to everyone here. My name is Susan Trin, and I am from the Poppulo marketing team. Thank you for tuning into our webinar today, Harnessing the Power of AI, Best Practices for Internal Communication Teams. A couple of housekeeping notes. We are currently on the Zoom platform, and you may use the Q&A panel on your console to enter questions, and then use the chat function for all other comments. We encourage you to engage with our speaker and each other throughout the conversation. We'll save time at the end to get to as many questions in the Q&A panel as possible. And yes, we will be sending out a recording to all attendees after the webinar. Now, I'm looking forward to today's discussion. While AI has been around for decades and a very hot and trendy topic in the last year, generative AI tools are new and they're changing how businesses communicate with their internal and external audiences, which is a big focus for Poppulo in supporting their partners and customers. So to tell you a little bit about your host, Poppulo is a leading communications and workplace experience software company. At Poppulo, we connect the people you need to reach with the right message across multiple channels like email, digital signage, mobile, internet, and more, all from a single platform. Our platform sets the standard in how technology can connect people, systems, and ways of working to deepen relationships and help organizations move forward. So today we serve over 4,500 customers across 80 countries, including nearly half of the Fortune 100, with enterprise-grade solutions that help the employee and customer experience, optimize workplace management, improve operations, and drive measurable impact. But enough of that. Now on to our featured speaker, Mark Dollins, President of North Star Communications Consultant. Welcome, Mark, and over to you.
Thank you, Susan, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I'm so pleased that you could join us here on a topic that really is quite trendy and very important to our craft or our discipline. By way of background, I currently run a consultancy that focuses on employee communications and engagement, and also in communications and marketing talent development. But for 30 plus years before that, I spent a number of decades in corporate communications as both the chief communication officer for a couple of different companies, including Pepsi Beverages and PepsiCo Foods, and also have worked in employee and global communications roles for DuPont, Quaker Oats, et cetera, a number of others. So I have a great deal of passion for employee communications, so much so that I wrote a book called Engaging Employees Through Communications in partnership with John Stemmel, who is the chair of the Department of Strategic Communications at the University of Missouri Journalism School. So we'll talk a little bit more about my partnership with Mizzou School and what we're doing. But I think the most important thing I'd like to talk today about is artificial intelligence, but not just any type of artificial intelligence, the kind that really focuses on it through the lens of employee communications. Everywhere we're looking these days, we're seeing that AI is having a breakout moment, but we're only seeing the tip of this iceberg. With AI-powered chatbots like ChatGPT and Microsoft's Bing and Google's Bard, they can perform very high-level tasks that previously only humans could do, like writing essays or programming computer codes. These large language models are really growing very, very quickly, and they can mimic human speech and patterns, conversations. And these examples of generative AI, which is a catch-all term for artificial intelligence, that can create new or original content based off of platforms, or excuse me, patterns and models that are learned with training. But the big point is, ChatGPT, as an example, reached over 100 million users in just the first 2 months after its launch earlier this year. So it's clearly proving to be a pivotal year for both development and adaptation of generative AI. So today we're going to take a look at AI, but again, specifically through the lens of employee communication. So we're going to share along the way what we're learning as an industry, and I think of employee communications as an industry. We have some survey results, very recent, in partnership with the University of Missouri, that tell us a little bit about how we're thinking and feeling as a community of employee communications practitioners about generative AI. We'll take a look at what's already here for us today, and a lot of what we're doing is about productivity for employee communications, but there's so much more beneath the surface of this tip of the iceberg that's around more strategic uses for what waits for us in the wings in the future. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the limitations and risks that are associated with using generative AI. We'll have a couple of recommendations, because I'm a big believer in information without potential action is not exactly the best kind of information to share. And then we should have a little bit of time for Q&A. So that's our agenda for today. But I want to share with where the information today is coming from, and it's really coming from two brand new resources, again, that look through AI through the lens of employee comms. There's a new artificial intelligence research or white paper that's been created by my team in partnership with a graduate student at the University of Missouri. And it really does provide a lot of context, much more detail around not just what is out there, but gives you the details and gives you direct links and access. And it's done with a lot of academic rigor, so you can have confidence and trust that the sources behind all of this data have been validated. We also have the survey data report from over 100 employee communications professionals who gave us the insights that we're going to be sharing with you today. And it's important also to understand what we mean by generative AI versus traditional AI. So when we think about traditional AI, which has been around for quite some time, it really tends to look at what it sees and simply tells you something about that data, right? It can tell you what it sees, but generative AI, which we're going to talk about today, can look at that same data and create something entirely new from it, right? The models that aim is to produce both novel and realistic outputs that are based off of what it reads and what it gleans from all the sources that it will review and pull for you. So just important to understand, when we talk about generative AI, it's about using technology to generate something new that wasn't there before. So I'm going to start with a quick poll, because I always like finding out where people are in their own journeys, and then I'll tell you what some of your colleagues in the employee communications world are thinking. So we're going to ask a question: have you used artificial intelligence for the purposes of employee communications and content development during the last 6 months? So this isn't about whether you did this on your own. You're trying to figure out an answer to a question from your husband or wife or partner or whoever. This is about, have you used AI specifically for the purposes of creating content development with employee communications over the last 6 months? So if you'll just enter your choice, we'll take a look at the results, and we'll move on, just to give us a sense of where folks are. So, wow, you're split down the middle. And that is a very interesting statistic. Actually, what I'll review for you, we could close this out, but it looks like half of us have done that, and half of us have not used employee or generative AI for employee communications. But let's take a look at what your colleagues in our survey have told us, right? So what they've told us is that they have some concerns about generative AI. And we asked them a number of different questions to just get a sense of, what is it that you like or don't like about generative AI? And there's a concern about, in general, whether AI is even good for society. We had about a split in thirds. A third said, yeah, they feel good about it. A third said, I'm not really sure. And a third said, I don't think this is good for our society. So it paints this picture that says we're kind of at the very early stages of understanding and wanting to use generative AI. So I think that's one area to think a little bit about. Some communicators, in fact, 44% of us had concerns about AI eliminating communications jobs. And I think, when something new hits our industry, that's not unusual to have some fear that perhaps some of the roles that we currently have that might be focused on some of the more transactional components of employee communications may go away. But I will tell you, I'm speaking later this week at the University of Virginia Darden School of Business with Angela Keene from Bloomberg, who runs the government beat in Washington for Bloomberg. And she told me in our prep conversation yesterday that Bloomberg has been using generative AI tools for quite some time. And as a result of that, they've actually created more jobs, quite frankly, that are part of AI. So while it may be okay to kind of think a little bit about this, may be challenging for some roles, I think we need to look at it from the perspective of, yes, some roles will probably go away, but some new roles will almost assuredly take their place. And so the question is, are we going to be ready to make that change as the technology changes the work that we do? So in terms of AI's influence on the future of employee communications, a third of us said it's not going to be part of what's going to happen in the future. But almost half of us said, yeah, it's going to be a part of the way we're going to have to adjust. So I think the half of you that said, yes, you haven't used it yet, probably are in that mix of folks who likely will be having a different answer, I suspect, this time next year. But this is, again, just begins to paint the picture, because there was a lot of confidence in the survey results that came from our communicators that said, yeah, like 80% of us know what AI is, right? We know, we understand what it is, but we're still skeptical about using it. And I think that's for good reason. So I would say the headline is that we have a mix of both utility, like this can be useful for the work that we're doing, and we have some fear or skepticism about using it. So when you think that 55% of us believe that using AI is ethical, but then we have 25% who thinks that using AI for employee communications is either unethical or they're undecided about it. So it says we're in the very early phases of experimentation and exploration with artificial intelligence. When we did a word cloud for this, by the way, the top word that emerged was scary. The other words that emerged right beneath it were efficiency and help. So you can kind of see how even the words in a word cloud further illustrate this mixed feeling that we have of utility and fear. So I'm going to take another quick poll, and this one is about if you see value in artificial intelligence for your employee communications efforts. So in the next 12 months, I'll put a little time period, where, if anywhere, do you think that AI can create value for your employee communications efforts? You're not limited to one. You can either say, I don't see it creating value for my organization, or you can click as many of the other ones as you see it developing or delivering value for your organization over the next year. Let's just take a quick look and see how we're beginning to feel about the future of AI and its impact on employee communications. Okay, so a couple of us think that it's not going to be creating value, but look at the response for generating content. 89% of us are seeing that And it's going to guide us. That's actually half of us on when and how to deliver communications. Only 20% of us see it supporting the employee brand, 13 solving strategic businesses like voluntary attrition, and over a third see it as helping drive the employee experience. So this is very consistent with some of the input that we received from our communications survey participants. So we can move on to the next one. We'll close this one out. All right. So let's talk a little bit about where communicators that we surveyed are seeing artificial intelligence appearing. You know, most of us, 84% of us, are seeing some form of artificial intelligence in business practices in our organizations. Most of them that made specific references talked about HR processes and AI being used to screen resumes or applications, perhaps even doing some preliminary interviewing. But not as many have seen it used in employee communications, right? So only 50% of us believe that it can deliver value for employee communications, and that's pretty consistent with what we just saw. And 37% of us are still kind of unsure. So the question is, what would be holding us back? And I don't have the details, I don't have the screen for this, but we asked employee communicators, what's holding you back from exploring and using artificial intelligence? And 23% of us said, I need to see a demonstration on content generation in my business environment to make me believe that it can deliver value. 17% said, I need some case studies that help me tell the story that it can actually deliver something more beneficial to my organization. 17% also said, I want to see data that says there's a measurable benefit in productivity from using artificial intelligence. And 16% said, I'd like to see an ROI case, a return on investment. So these are the kinds of things that are standing in the way. And I share this with you in context, right? Because I think, you know, as you're seeing the rest of this presentation, you'll understand why what you're seeing, feeling, and experiencing is actually not that far from what our official survey results generated from employee communicators. So with that context, I want to talk a little bit about the landscape. We talk about this landscape, and clearly AI is a very big, broad topic, generative AI. It's a formidable task to try and put this into recognizable buckets. But for the purposes of this webinar, I'm going to cover these specific topics: productivity, predictive analytics, employee experience, a little bit about the brand support, and some of the limitations, which I think are important to address. And I think we're also we've got another option for you to dive deeper into any and all of this, which is that research paper. We'll be sending Poppulo will be sending the links to the download of both of those research papers that I mentioned earlier on. And they've got all kinds of additional case studies. There are prompts that you can use. There are best practices that are also featured in those. But this is like the really big picture of what I'm going to cover today. And this is how I'm going to cover it. I'm going to go back to that 30, I think it was 38% or what the large, sorry, the large number that said people expect to be using this for content generation in the next 12 months. And this is very consistent with where employee communicators currently are using AI. They're using it for productivity, to save them time, to save them energy in generating content as they have limited resources. Their bandwidth is already fully taken with the workload that they have. So what's the first thing we want to do is try and get things drafted more easily or researched more easily. This is where the bulk of the current activity for employee communications and AI is landing. But what's beneath the surface, and this is where I really want to open some eyes today, is that it has far more strategic implications for employee communications when we look at things like How do we analyze data to make better decisions as employee communicators? What can we come from predictive analytics to help us make better decisions about what kinds of content we should be using, where should we place it, what timing, what channels, etc. Strategic versioning, which is, we'll talk a little bit about that going forward, but that's about customizing to internal audiences. Backcasting, a highly strategic use. I'm going to go over that. And what's happening with end users already, even if we did absolutely nothing, chances are good that our employees are learning how to use generative AI. And in some cases, through systems we already have in-house that we use to communicate. So this is the big picture of where I think we are and where I think the big opportunities ahead of us lie in terms of using the more strategic capabilities of generative AI in this list of activities here. So when I asked our communicators in the survey where they were using it, well, no big surprise here. Take a look on content generation, discussion guides for managers, Q&A for key issues or messaging documents. So, not a lot of things being used for more strategic uses. And again, it makes sense, right? This is the quick and easier stuff that we want to get to. So I say you're in good company in terms of the early results that you shared. But the question then becomes, well, what are they using? What are we using? And some of these may very well be familiar to you. ChatGPT is one of the ones that probably has the largest sort of media presence and largest expanded use. But Microsoft, Google, Jasper, even Claude, which we'll talk a little bit about, which is a joint effort between Zoom and another technology company, they're releasing things today that are going to change the way that we do Zooms in terms of follow-ups and messaging and message taking and note summarizing. But what's different about all of these is that there are different response times. There are different costs associated with them. Some of them have, an introductory, free version. Some of them have an upgraded version that costs. They have different writing styles. Their levels of accuracy can also be adjusted. And importantly, we'll talk a little bit about bias that exists within these platforms that we have to be aware of and we have to be sensitive to. So if you're overwhelmed already, good Lord, Mark, why are you going through so many things? And this is like, rapid fire tools and orientation. Let me just pause for a second and say, we got you covered. Those documents that I highlighted at the early part of this presentation have everything in it that you need for exploration. And so we highlight what the positives are, what the potential drawbacks, what the strengths are, whether it's free, whether it costs. And there's a direct link that takes you to not just the primary research, but to these sites and these tools themselves. So take a pause and just realize I'm sharing a number of these with you because we've only got so much time. But I want you to understand that the resources are available for you to take your time with once you've downloaded these research documents that I've shared with you. So if you've never touched a generative AI, I put together a very quick demonstration, which is, I wanted to ask ChatGPT to create an introduction for generative AI to employee communicators. And this is what it basically came up with, right? So what's important about this is, I'm not going to read this, obviously, but what's important about this is that you can have a conversation with these tools and say, I like that initial response, but I need you to cut it down to 50 words. Or I like this, but I want more specifics or details about how this is important or how this is going to be beneficial to employee communication. So these tools, they are highly iterative. And we have to pay attention to what they come back to us with. And quite frankly, at this point, and probably forever, we still need to question the content that doesn't look or feel right, right? This is not a check the box and we're done and we've done our work. We still, as professional employee communicators, have to take the ownership of what's been written and verify both its accuracy and its tone to make sure it still works for our own organizations. And I'm going to say this and come back to it a couple of times about the accuracy isn't there consistently just yet. And I've got a couple of case studies or examples that help illustrate that. But here's the important thing is that this will get better over time. And it's going to get better at generating outputs. It's going to learn from us just as we're learning from it, right? So just a quick example. So again, these are 2 pages from the report that shows how we take a different view and looking at these large language models. We categorize them in terms of industry tools for either employee communications or for human resources, and we have direct links to each and every one of these tools that have been validated. Okay. I'm going to go next and talk a little bit about the importance of prompts. And it's easy to write a quick prompt into any of these generative AI tools that could say, tell me the history of Chicago, and it can generate it back to you. But the more specific and the more iterative you are, the better the response that you're going to be getting. So if you look even at these prompts about summarizing information that's in the content that you provide. If we apply this to the world of employee communications, imagine being able to analyze the sentiment of town halls and all those survey responses that we get back, to be able to take a look at the questions that we might get in advance and summarize not just the tone but the emotion that's behind the way the questions are asked, to summarize the questions or the responses of those surveys, to have follow-up and action items. This is a tool that will help us do that and save a lot of time. So it's not about content generation. This is about content analytics and giving something back that helps us get to the core of what we're learning from the data and from measurement techniques that we may already have in place. And it turns out that AI is surprisingly adept at emotional analysis, in case you're wondering. And there have been studies that show in the medical field, for example, that patients preferred chatbot responses over physician responses, that showed for both quality and for empathy in the responses. So the capability is there to assess and to analyze emotions that are coming into what people are feeding into these generative AI platforms. So anyway, if you think about, this is if it can generate that kind of emotive response, imagine what we can do for interpersonal kinds of communications, small group or team communications, or even large scale communications. The next question is, so what if we want to get a little bit more creative? Well, there are actually a number of tools that are out there. And I'm going to start with one that's all about storytelling. You may be or may not be familiar with an application called Tome. It's a presentation tool that has been developed for outlining and creating presentations. It's a generative storytelling tool that will allow us to construct complete stories, right? Presentations or outlines from scratch. And it comes with the ability to provide intelligent titles, pagination, page layouts, and page text. Communicators then can be more effective and engaging in personalizing presentations as a result of using Tome. Another, for those of you who are in design, tool is Midjourney, right? And Midjourney, basically think of it as a visual creation application that you can ask it to create something like a panda wearing armor and carrying balloons, and it can generate a comment or an image just like that. So there are so many different uses for these various platforms that are out there. And one that I don't have here pictured here is Jasper Campaigns. Jasper actually has an ability to provide a brief for a campaign summary. So, how many times that we're like, how do we get all these ideas onto one, in one succinct way? Well, it can not only generate a campaign summary for your organization, it can also generate assets for it, like a TikTok script or article ideas, landing pages, press releases, you name it. This is a tool that can help take all of our ideas and crystallize them into outputs that we can then use for our communication programming. So there are a number of other applications. Some of you may be familiar with DALL-E 2. That's another one that's out there that's quite good. But I share these with you to show these are all things that can help us be more productive, save time, and even more creative with storytelling. But I want to shift gears now and talk a little bit more about what's beneath that iceberg tip, and that's the more strategic uses. And probably one of the more interesting ones that I've discovered is the whole concept of backcasting. All right. So now, whether you've heard about it or not, the reality is backcasting has been around for a long, long time. It's different from forecasting because forecasting is built on what we know today. Based on what we know today, here's what we think will happen next year or 5 years or 10 years from now. So it's very incremental in terms of its ability to drive innovation and breakthrough ideas. Backcasting, on the other hand, is one where we start with what is that future ideal, state that we want to solve for. So maybe it's, hey, I want to build a future state for my organization in employee communication terms, where all of my team members have access to and fully use our intranet. Right. Or maybe it's something that is about ESG commitments. And, the year is 2029, and we've just reached net neutral with our carbon emissions. How did we get there? So let me give you a crystal clear example of how you could use it for something like an employee communications issue. And I'm going to do a live demo here using ChatGPT. And with any luck, I'm going to be able to pull this up and it'll work for me. So hold on just a second. There we go. Now, you should very shortly be able to see. Hold on a second. I thought I had it. And okay. So I've got this ChatGPT, and I've taken a scenario that I've written. It's December 2026. My company has less than 1% voluntary attrition at the front line. Go us, employee communicators and HR folks. But it's all thanks to the fact that we have a stronger communications that resonate more effectively with employees that starts next year. Some data points we wanted to share. This is all made up, by the way. But let's say 40% of our frontline employees don't have a company-issued mobile devices. Well, that's going to be a problem. 20% of our frontline employees work in locations where either local management or maybe our work council union say, well, we can't have you looking at screens because it's a safety issue, right? And maybe 43% don't get the information in local language if you're a global company. And we didn't have alignment on governance between the global channels that our global folks work with and some of the local channels that are, in fact, managed by local people in different markets. And finally, we didn't have consistent ways of packaging, right? So this is the full story. But then these are the questions, right? So how do we achieve this future state where we have less than 1% voluntary attrition? What were the key milestones along the way? What strategies did we implement? What were the stakeholders and partners that we had to involve? What challenges did we overcome? Financial resources, et cetera. So that's the question that I'm asking ChatGPT to solve for us. And I just hit my little send message here, and you can see it's already generating responses. Okay, so here it is. So it's got details on strategy and analysis, on stakeholder engagement, on technology, localization, personalization. These are all the things that we would have done between now and 2026 to change this. Now, you may say, I would be doing this anyway, and that's great. But the fact is, remember, you can ask it more questions to go into more details about how you would solve this and how you might take a different approach, or you have different data points. If you can feed in as much data as you can and you want, this is going to start telling you, check this out. Check out this approach to solving this issue, right? So the key stakeholders, the challenges, this is just me putting in this in the first time, but I could go on and on and on and ask more questions so I can get more detail, right? So when you think about how we demonstrate value as a function in employee communications, this is the strategy element, right? So we're going to get to the productivity by using generative AI to help us do drafting and summarizing. But this is where we're going to make a real difference in moving the needle on business performance and solving business problems. So I hope this gives you just a little bit of a flavor for how we can start using this in more in more strategic ways that go beyond that tip of the iceberg. Okay, so I'm going to go back now to the presentation, and this was the demonstration that I just shared with you, right? Just to kind of see how I took this and put it into ChatGPT. All right. Well, what else can we do with this that's a little bit more strategic? Well, the good news is, if you think this doesn't sound like me, or this doesn't sound like our organization, there are platforms out there that in fact can customize what generative AI brings to you, but with your brand voice. And I'll use the example of Jasper voice. It takes what you tell it about your organization's brand and voice and ensures that the content matches what you tell it, right? So this is important as we think about the employee experience, as we think about ensuring that our brand voice, our corporate brand, or brands within our organizations are fully represented in the content that we create, visually as well as through editorial content, right? So another example is strategic versioning. Okay, well, should we communicate with senior executives with the exact same language that we communicate with our frontline employees? Probably not, you're going to say, or I hope, because that's the reality. Is we have to be able to provide increasing customization, and strategic versioning lets us do that, right? So we write with specific needs of audiences in mind. So I'm a big believer in segmentation. Maybe you want something to go to people with 15 or 20 years of experience, more tenured employees versus newbies, right? Maybe you want something for supervisors instead of what's going to the front line. Doesn't mean you're rewriting everything, but you're adjusting for tone. You're creating strategic versions for those audiences that you have segmented, right? Boomers versus Gen Xers or Gen Ys or whoever you want to segment in your organization. So these are more strategic uses of generative AI that take the idea of creating content to that next level, right? That we're not just saying, here, solve it once and for all with one version. We're going to make sure that as we send that message out, it's going to resonate with the right people in the right way and with the right language. So I talked a little bit about predictive analytics earlier, and so this is what we mean by that. We can make more informed decisions about our content by using predictive analytics. And so AI can impact or can measure the impact of our content and content strategies. It can take a look at how we're packaging or repackaging our content for some or all of our different platforms. It can suggest headlines. It can suggest when and how we place this content into different channels, and say, here are options, our range of channels. You tell it, and it can come back to you and say, well, I wouldn't put this in a company newsletter. I would put this in a team leader guide that you would send to senior leaders. So it can develop things like headlines that are more provocative and attention-getting, subheads for greater content engagement. So they essentially can do a lot of what we would want to do if we had all the details and the capability to run the numbers. So even if you have the most basic of tracking on your intranet or your email opens, you can in fact feed that into ChatGPT or any of those generative AIs and say, when should I place this, and how should I be sending it, in what channel? So it'll come up with these solutions for you. So, and one of the many organizations that's doing this is Poppulo. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Poppulo's solution for AI and doing exactly this type of predictive analytics to support its users in their work to connect with employees. I want to talk also a little bit about business cases, right? So attrition is an issue that's hitting everybody hard. The war for talent, no matter where you are, is a challenge. And increasingly, companies have lots of options on assessing the potential for folks who are leaving voluntarily. So IBM is an example here. They have a predictive attrition program that can predict with 95% accuracy the rate at which employees are about to quit. And then they can have recommended strategies to managers on how to engage and retain those employees. But there are other platforms out there too, companies like Retrain.ai or Eightfold.ai or HR Signal And all of them have a crop of new intelligence platforms that specialize in these predictive analytics. Why am I talking to us about those of us in employee communications? Well, sometimes those recommendations, and I would say almost all the time, those recommendations for fixing this challenge involve communications to our colleagues and team members. So the more we understand about how these kinds of platforms work, the more we understand about the recommendations that they're coming up with, the more we partner with our colleagues, the more we're going to be able to tie our capabilities using generative AI and employee communications to solving business problems. And I keep wanting to, emphasize how important it is that we go below that surface of the water, below the iceberg, and get as quickly as possible to these kinds of strategic solutions. All right, so that's my overview of some of the more strategic capabilities. And now I have to give my big asterisk, which is this stuff isn't always right, and it isn't always perfect. I'm going to give you two quick case studies that show exactly why and how this doesn't work always the same way. So you may have read about an attorney in the U.S. District Court in Washington, D.C. that filed a legal brief that was filled with judicial opinions and legal citations. The only problem is 6 of the cases never existed. ChatGPT literally made them up, and the lawyer did not verify or deliver due diligence, and as a result of that, got into a lot of trouble. So lawyers using ChatGPT and others are assuming both legal and security risks by not verifying it. And so what's happened now as a result of this is many organizations, maybe some of yours, are developing their own platforms, right, that ensure that there is security. So Ernst & Young, EY, just announced last week, for example, that they are launching their own generative AI platform for their colleagues to use, so they stay out of trouble and not getting sensitive information into other search platforms that could create some issues for them down the line. So again, just make sure the good news is that, and I said this before, these will get better, and the number and the frequency of errors will begin to reduce over time, but we're still very early into this process. Let me give you another example involving the introduction, in fact, of Google's Bard AI when it was introduced earlier this year. The question in their demo was, what new discoveries from the James Webb Space Telescope can I tell my 9-year-old about? So this was a demo as they were literally introducing it. And the answer that Bard came back with was that that telescope took the very first pictures of planets, of a planet outside of our solar system. The only problem is it wasn't true. The photos actually were taken 20 years earlier by a different satellite or telescope. And as a result, Alphabet, the parent company of Google, lost over $100 billion in one day in their market cap as their stock crashed. So these are very big and broad examples, and some of us would just say, thank God we learn about this stuff, and there, but for the grace of God go I. So remember, this stuff is not perfect, and we have to take responsibility to make sure that whatever we generate is in fact accurate. So let's talk a little bit about some of the other challenges, and that's, I mentioned bias. As AI looks for content, you have to keep in mind that it can find not only fake content, but also biased content. It's another drawback. AI's impact on society raises concern regarding bias and widening inequalities. In fact, the ACLU expresses worry about how, and that's about how artificial intelligence and technology can exacerbate racial and other inequities because bias is inherent in AI outcomes and the training process. Amazon, for a fact, even shelved its AI-powered recruiting engine because it had a bias against selecting women applicants, right? So accuracy and bias are amplified by these AI tools, and because a lot of it is embedded in the data that's used for training. So racial bias, for example, is a major issue in performance reviews. And studies show that 74% of adults, and this is just in the US, believe that they receive unfair treatment based on workers' race or ethnicity. So it's important, again, that you understand and validate where the data is coming from, and that you're also sensitive to any bias that may be naturally included in it. Let me give you another example, and this is a company called Coco. It's an online mental health intervention app that has reached nearly 2 million people, and most of them are adolescents. The platform started as a clinical trial at MIT, and it's based on the concept of crowdsourcing cognitive therapy. So the users are taught to help each other and think more hopefully about the world. But unlike traditional peer support platforms, all of the interactions in their service are supported by augmented artificial intelligence. So they got into some trouble because there were ethical concerns that arose with the use of AI technology in digital mental health because they didn't say to the users that they were employing a Copilot approach with human supervision. So there's human interaction, but a lot of what was going on there was being done with generative AI. So, and as they do that, another issue is that ChatGPT, for example, may not understand the nuances of workplace situations, and we've all been, in those where it's like, yeah, but did they know this or did they know that? So those nuances that happen in workplace situations may not necessarily be reflected if you're using a generative AI a solution for your work. So again, just a little bit of an asterisk, but it's something that we have to pay attention to. The other issue I want to also raise is about AI and regulations and ESG specifically. We'd love to think that we can operate in a perfect world and we can do whatever we want around and create our own time and process for working with AI. But the reality is we're already seeing legislation and regulatory entities, specifically in the EU. They're introducing what they call the AI Act. It's the first comprehensive AI law in the world, and what it's being done is to protect from manipulation of people or specific vulnerable groups. For example, they don't want voice-activated toys that would encourage dangerous behavior in children, or things like social scoring or classifying people based off of behavior or socioeconomic status. So there's a lot of things that this regulatory environment is going to change in terms of how our companies and how we will be able to use. And that's just on the outside world. But internally, we also have some issues we have to start thinking about. And that's, things like ESG goals that we've set for ourselves. So believe it or not, AI systems, especially large scale models, can consume significant amounts of energy, contributing to carbon emissions. I know, go figure, right? So to mitigate this, companies are starting to have to think about developing alternative ways to use generative AI in ways such as using low power processors that can help reduce the energy consumption. So whatever your ESG goals are, you have to think about how generative AI impacts them. You have to think about your culture. You have to think about your values as an organization. And I think this is a big opportunity for employee communications and communicators to lean in and to help their organizations solve this, versus waiting to be told at some point that legal and IT or whoever has said, here's how you can use generative AI. So step up and lead this to the best of your ability if you're in this space. And I think most of us are. This is a real opportunity, and they don't come along that often. So I can't conclude without talking a little bit about privacy and security. This is going to be an ongoing issue, but it feeds into the comment that I just made, that this is going to take a team and cross-functional kind of solution for each organization. Some of you may already have your efforts underway to address generative AI and how you'll use it in your organizations. But it's important to understand that building trust in AI security involves not just data and algorithms, but it includes assessing against the culture, the value, and ESG that I just mentioned. And finally, our employees are gearing up already, right? This is already happening. Companies are rolling out their own solutions to this. I mentioned before that Zoom is partnered with a company called Anthropic, and if they haven't already, they're just about to launch their capabilities for generative AI to take notes, to summarize, to circulate to-dos that come out of your Zoom meetings. It can do translations real time in other languages. And so this is a really big thing that's happening. And then at the same time, people who do project management are also very rapidly developing use of AI. And Gartner, in fact, predicts that by the year 2030, 80% of project management tasks are going to be AI driven. So we need to get in front of this, not wait for it to affect us. That's really my solution or my comment here. And I want to talk just a little bit about what Poppulo is doing. So they're implementing AI into their software, so you can use the technology like generative AI and predictive analytics with what you've got for your existing communication workflow. So this is very recent. Just last week, they announced AI Suite, and it's going to be a personal assistant for communicators and content creation and smart recommendations, just as we were talking about, along with intelligent insights. If you scan that code there, you'll see it'll take you to registering for a webinar that's scheduled on November 14th to learn more about that. But I want to thank Poppulo for helping lead the way on this important content and topic. So finally, when we looked at what's happening with how AI is delivering value for employee comms, it's coming at us quickly, right? So 55% of us think within the next year that value is coming, and 31% say it may take 2 years. I'm probably going to side with the 1 year because it is coming so very quickly. And if you look at the how, it's really about saving time in drafting materials, all that stuff that's about productivity. I think when we do this a year from now, that answer is going to be very, very different. So what do we do with all this? Well, we've got to engage our leadership. I talked about this is a cross-functional, either join the party or get it started. Partner with key functions to take a look against your established policies, your values, and your culture. How do we work with AI in a way that's consistent with who we are? Assess the use cases against ESG and emerging regulations. That's going to happen. Engage other communicators. Hey, we're all in this together, so we're going to learn. And especially if you're in a larger organization, make sure the left hand and the right hand know what you're doing between regional communicators and global communicators, et cetera. So make sure you have a united effort in trying to solve for this. And you got to commit to revisiting this regularly. This is going to be a wave among waves, among waves, among waves. It's going to keep coming, and we're going to have to consistently assess it. And we have to test the existing platforms for yourself. You got to get in, you got to get your feet wet. So I would encourage you to do that. And hopefully the tools that we're providing will allow us to do that. So listen, I've been talking, I've got one, we're going to skip this last poll just so we can get to Q&A, but I do want to thank you for listening, and we'll take your Q&A or your questions. I'll do my best to answer them. I'm going to stop sharing and turn that back over to you, Susan.
Thank you, Mark. So much interesting information in there. I'm so impressed you can fit all of that in. Before we get right to Q&A, just want to put one more poll question from the Poppulo team. If anything really resonated with you today and you want to talk to a representative here about leveraging AI as part of your internal comm strategy, please let us know. Just take 10 seconds here. All right. Thank you so much. So as Mark said, if you have any questions, please enter them in the Q&A console there. I know a lot of people wrote some in the chat, so we've taken a note of those two so far. Mark, just kind of FYI, like you answered a lot of questions that were around security and concerns about company data and the confidentiality of that, and obvious.
Yeah, it's a work in progress, right? So in many cases, organizations are tackling this, but in many cases they aren't, and that's where I think we can raise the issue and say, let's get going on this, because we can't be left behind. We can't let ourselves be exposed. But and whether we use any of the open generative AI platforms, or we need to take a look at doing this ourselves. It's the train is leaving the station. I'll put it that way. It's time to get going on it.
Right, right. So just addressing, this was about, or it was a bit earlier in your presentation, just regarding skepticism around AI in general. Like, in your opinion, is it purely fear-based in the context of job losses, or more philosophical than that? I did notice another member of the audience said in the chat, like, is this what people felt like about the internet in the 90s?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. I think it's what people felt about it, about the internet, and I think it's the way people felt about social media and digital marketing and digital communications when that evolved, right? We all had to change with it. This one, though, I think is probably has the greatest potential for immediacy in terms of change, because it's there's so much happening, and it's almost like, wow, why didn't I zoom in on this 2 years ago and really go deep on it? But the fact is, it's here, and we all have to adjust. I think the fear is largely based off of job loss, but I think there's also a fair amount of skepticism relative to the accuracy. And as people learn more about some of the bias issues, for example, that are in some of the results that generative AI can produce, it also produces some, I think it's a healthy tension, a healthy skepticism, which is good, because it keeps us hopefully on our toes to say, let's not accept everything at face value. Let's make sure we're spending time. I actually did a research piece for someone recently where I asked for, 5 examples, very specific examples of something that was happening in a particular city. I got 5 of them. Only 4 of them I could validate. The 5th, I don't know where it came from, but it's just an example. It's like, I got to take it as well. But, we got to get our feet wet, got to start using it.
Absolutely. Can't put all of our eggs in one basket, but that challenge does keep us on our toes. There was one question about, specifically, can you please cover explainability? How does the content creator explain the logic or rationale that sits behind the content created by AI when questioned by, for example, a regulator? I think this might have been a little earlier in your presentation.
Yeah, I mean, generative AI crawls the internet, right? It crawls and it extracts what's been written. The issue, of course, is whether the data is correct. And I think that's where the regulator is going to question it. It's like, that's where we have to do our homework when it pulls from all these various sources that are in the digital world to say, here's our answer. So we have to take responsibility for it and assess it. So my guess is, if a regulator is asking a question about where did this come from, we have to be able to say, I validated it, and here is the source of that.
Absolutely. So it seems like a lot of people loved your live demo example, just to see it in real time. There was a curious question of, like, did you use any of those tools in this presentation outside of the live?
Yeah, no, I did not. The reality is that most of the content that I pulled for this presentation has come from those source documents that I created without artificial intelligence. It's all been written, it's all been researched, and I don't think that generative AI can source documentation. Maybe it can, but I haven't seen it used that way. So I did it the old-fashioned way, and there's a lot of academic discipline and research discipline behind them in those downloadable documents. But the content came from those reports.
Yes.
That's a great question.
I liked it too. I guess a recent question that came is, so is AI going to put real writers out of work? I don't know if this is very similar to kind of that fear for internal communications in general.
No, I mean, I don't think so. I think, when you think about real writers and their ability to put that human touch, that emotive sense into great writing, I don't see that. Perhaps one day, but I don't see that today. I think this is more for drafting purposes, but somebody still has to come up with the key points, right, of what is this message that we're delivering. And you can say, put it in 500 words, make it more urgent, create a sense of urgency in it. You can do those kinds of things with it. But I think the best of storytellers are not replaceable. That's a human capability that I believe is much further away.
I agree. Well, I think we are just at time, and I want to thank you everyone for your questions. If we didn't get to yours, we will connect with you offline. And yes, the question of will you be getting a recording of this as along with the reports that Mark talked about? Yes. And I just want to thank Mark himself for joining us today. We really appreciate giving your time and your insights. And we hope to see everyone on our next event. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.